Hello guys, welcome back again. It's soon, I know, I'm not normally this quick at producing new videos, but here we are, hopefully turned over a new leaf, and I'm hoping I'll be back a lot more often nowadays. Today I'm going with something a bit different. It's going to be a bit of a week of lists this week. From Wednesday I'm going to be starting the top 5 Wednesdays. I found it on Goodreads, and I know it's something quite a lot of booktubers have started doing, and it's a really good theme, especially this week and in the next coming weeks, so I'm going to start doing that and try and get that out every single Wednesday. Fingers crossed. So the thing I'm going to do today is quite similar to Top 5 Wednesdays, but different in a few crucial aspects. Firstly, it's a top 10, not a top 5. And secondly, all the inspiration for these videos is going to come from this book. So this whole series we sell at work, but obviously of all the listographies, it was the book-related one that was always going to grab me most. Essentially what this does is give 60 to 70 topics that it wants you to make a list of. So for example, top 10 favourite books, which is what I'm going to try and tackle today. But it goes into much more detail about things such as top 10 audiobooks, top 10 graphic novels, top 10 books to read on holiday, a whole different series of topics I wouldn't think of normally. So I think this is going to be a really good inspiration for trying to find some new and unique things to talk about. As I've already mentioned, the topic for today is my top 10 most beloved books. Now, the wording of the list called a few things into question for me. So these aren't necessarily my top 10 favourite books, or the top 10 best books that I've read, but these are the 10 books that I have the strongest attachment to, feel the most strongly about, and are the ones that I love the most, even if I do admit that they aren't necessarily the best books ever written. And I'm not just giving 10 books that are my favourite, I'm actually ranking them in order, which was so difficult to do, but I'm happy with where I've got to now. So getting right down to it, my number 10 book is actually one that isn't on my shelf here, it's back at home, so I can't wave it at you, but it's The Passage by Justin Cronin. Now this is the book that really got me interested and scared of vampires again. It came out just after the Twilight hype, so everyone's opinion of vampires was that it was all going to be this lovey-dovey, romancy rubbish. Actually, this book was completely different and really put vampires back on the map as the horrible characters that they originally were when they were invented. It's a book that combines the best aspects of horror and epic fantasy style quest books along the lines of Lord of the Rings, and it's the perfect mash of two of my favourite genres. And even though it's not a very well known book, it's one that I think is absolutely brilliant and one of my most beloved books of all time. So number 8 on my list is another one that got mentioned in my Best of 2014 video, and that's this, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Murakami. It's on this list for 2 reasons. One, because this was the first proper book of literary fiction that I read, and it was something I'd avoided like the plague before this, but this has opened me up into that world of more literary, serious fiction. And secondly, it is just an incredible book. It's one of those ones that really sticks with you, and you really carry on thinking about after you've closed the last page, and I think it's one that has rightfully earned the hype and reputation that it's got. Number 7 on my list is a bit of a surprise to me, as well as anybody else. It's actually a book I studied for my A-level, which is never a good start, but with this I've reread it since my A-levels and absolutely devoured it, and it's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I'm not a big fan of any of the other Bronte's works, I don't like Jane Eyre or any of those, but Wuthering Heights, for some reason, I think it's the atmosphere that the book creates, it's the dynamism of the characters. I absolutely just loved it, and it doesn't feel as old as it is. It doesn't feel like a classic. It feels like it could be a modern work of fiction, and it's incredibly well done. It's the oldest book that's going to make a mention on this list, and it's possibly the oldest book I've read and enjoyed, but it is definitely one of those ones that stuck with me and that I have an enormous amount of appreciation for. Number 6 on my list is a book I've gushed about ridiculously in the past few weeks on this channel. If you saw my review that went up a couple of days ago, I actually gave this book a perfect score, which is nigh on impossible, in my opinion. It's this, Atul Gawande's Being Mortal. It's on this list for 2 reasons. One, because it's an extremely important topic that I think is approached really, really well in this book, and it's one that's going to stick with me for a very, very long time. And secondly, because this book is the epitome of what non-fiction should be. It's not full of dense, heavy, boring material. It's not really old-fashioned or terribly written. It is, without a doubt, the most gripping non-fiction I've read, and it's more gripping than 90% of novels I've read as well. It's the absolute pinnacle of what non-fiction should be, and that's why that's made its way onto this list. Number 5 on my list is Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. This is the book that bridged the gap between teen and adult literature for me. It's about a teen main character, but everything else about it is standard, stereotypical, epic fantasy, and I absolutely devoured these. These were the book series that really launched me into other fantasy series like Terry Goodkind and Brandon Sanderson, and this, for that reason alone, is a book that will always have a significant place for me because it directed my reading for the rest of my life so much. Number 4 on my list is The Magic Faraway Tree by Enid Blyton. This is, without a doubt, one of the childhood classics that I look back on with the fondest memories. I remember reading it when I was younger, I reread it when I was a little bit older, and I'm looking forward to rereading it soon. It's just the series that really inspired me to love reading and the world that reading could create. I wouldn't do the job I do or read as much as I do were it not for this series of books, and for that reason it would be wrong not to put this in my top 10. So number 3 on my list is another book I read when I was a teenager, and I think part of the reason it's got such a high standing for me is that I read it when I was an early teenager, and obviously at that point everything has such a big impact on you, and this book is no different. It had a really big impact on my reading life since then, and is one of the books that I will always credit with really teaching me the joy of reading. It's Sabriel by Garth Nix. I've actually just finished it again, and completely agree with my earlier assessment that it is one of the best books I've ever read. The characters are really well constructed, the story is really well integrated and plotted, and the world that he creates is absolutely incredible. On all fronts, this is a really, really brilliant book, and whenever I see it on my shelf, at work, hear anybody talking about it, it's one of the books that has the warmest rush of feelings associated with it, and it's well deserving of number 3 on my top 10 most beloved books list. Number 2 on my most beloved books list is Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game. Now, if we can take aside the fact that the film they made is dire, and that Orson Scott Card is a bit of a douchebag, it's actually an absolutely incredible book. It's without a doubt the best sci-fi book I've ever read, and that has possibly ever been written. It's so well constructed, it's the most engrossing book. I missed a train station that I needed to get off at just because I was so caught up in this book. And it gets lauded about a lot, but this is actually the best twist and the best shock I've ever had in a book. And simply because it is possibly the best book I've ever read, this deserves a spot on my list. Here we are. What's going to be my number 1 most beloved book ever? I feel like we need a drum roll. It's Redwall by Brian Jacks. Maybe a bit of a surprise. It's a bit of a surprise to me when I started thinking about it, but thinking back, I cannot think of a book series that I've got a stronger attachment to. It's essentially, as I've said before, Game of Thrones with animals. And it's a 9 to 12 age group. It's kind of pre-teen age. But the way that it makes such good storylines and such complicated worlds and characters and dynamics really work for that age group is absolutely incredible. It's the book that started my love for swords and magic and fighting and morbidly dying. But for all those reasons, it will stay with me forever, and it is the one book that has dictated the rest of my reading life more than any other. And it is one of those books that I will always look at with a supreme amount of fondness. And even though they are literally aimed for 9, 10-year-old kids, I am so excited to reread them at some point that it is untrue. They are without a doubt the books that I love the most out of everything I've ever read. So there we have it, my top 10 most beloved books of all time list. It was very hard to make, and I'm very surprised by some of the things that made it onto the list, and I'm especially surprised by what got number 1. Didn't even come into my head when I started thinking about it, but now I am so convinced that I got my order spot on right. Let me know down below if you think my order was completely wrong, or there's any books you'd pop in there. Let me know what your most beloved book of all time is. If you did enjoy the video, please give me a like and a subscribe. You guys have been great with all the support so far, so if we could carry that on, that'd be fantastic. My Goodreads and Twitter links are in the description below, so feel free to friend and follow me on there. Otherwise, I'll be back on Wednesday with my first Top 5 Wednesday, and I'll look forward to seeing you then.